The silence in the grand chamber of the Cathar Interstellar Concord was usually one of reverence, of carefully weighed pronouncements. Today it was thick with a smug, almost pitying disdain. On the central dais, Ambassador Corvus of Terra stood, a lone, unassuming figure, while around him, holographic representations of beings from across 1,000-star systems shimmered with ill-concealed derision. The topic: humanity's peculiar attachment. "Ambassador," rasped High Counselor Threll, his voice like stones grinding together, "your species continues to perplex and frankly disappoint. We discuss resource allocation for planetary defense, the strategic deployment of fleets, matters of galactic survival. And your latest cultural data packet, it speaks of canine companions, creatures you call dogs. Billions of them, consuming resources, serving no discernible strategic purpose beyond emotional placation." A ripple of condescending amusement flowed through the chamber. The Xylosians, beings of pure logic, vibrated their crystalline forms in what passed for a sigh of exasperation. The reptilian case car envoys hissed softly, their slit pupils narrowing. To them, and to most of the galaxy, these dogs were a symbol of human softness, their inexplicable sentimentality. A species that had clawed its way to the stars, that possessed a stubborn, often infuriating resilience, yet handicapped itself with these. Pets, primitive, inefficient, a throwback. They saw creatures that begged for scraps, that performed tricks for approval, that offered a fleeting, warm comfort against the cold void. They saw weakness. They saw an exploitable flaw. They had always misunderstood the term domesticated. They heard tamed, subdued, rendered harmless. They never considered what kind of species would, or even could, look at a wolf, a creature of fang and claw, of pack hunter instinct and untamed spirit, and see not just a threat to be eradicated, but a partner to be forged. They never asked the right questions. They never truly understood humans. Not until the day the outpost on Cygnus X7 went dark. Not until the day the galaxy learned why humans truly domesticated wolves. This isn't a story about fluffy pets or the gentle nuzzle of a loyal friend in times of peace. This is a chronicle of a brutal awakening. This is about the day the galaxy stared into the abyss of human pragmatism, a pragmatism so deep and so ancient it was mistaken for sentiment, and recoiled in horrified understanding. They thought they knew us. They were catastrophically wrong. And the price of that education was paid in blood and fire, on a day when the thin veneer of civilization was ripped away, and something ancient, something allied, was unleashed. For generations, the galaxy had catalogued humanity's eccentricities. Our art, our music, our irrational bursts of heroism and equally irrational self-destruction. And always the dogs, on warships in frontier colonies beside lone asteroid miners. Small ones, large ones, sleek hunters, shaggy guardians. The xenobiologists classified them, Canis familiaris, a descendant of an extinct Terran predator. They noted the resource expenditure, the training regimens that seemed more like play, the emotional bonds that seemed, to their cold logic, entirely inefficient. The Cathar, for instance, employed bioengineered servitors, creatures of absolute obedience, designed for specific tasks, emotionless, disposable. The Xylosians used networked AI drones, extensions of their collective consciousness. These were tools, efficient, logical, understandable. Human dogs, however, were messy. They required feeding, grooming, veterinary care. They displayed unpredictable bursts of affection or aggression. They mourned, they celebrated, they got underfoot. A species aspiring to galactic relevance, clinging to such an anachronism. It was baffling. Human delegates would try to explain. They'd use words like loyalty, companionship, unconditional love. And the alien representatives would nod politely, their internal translators flagging these terms as primitive emotional bonding or residual pack instinct, inefficiently sublimated. They saw the human who stroked his dog's head and interpreted it as a man seeking comfort from a lesser being, a master indulging a pet. They missed the subtle tensing of the man's shoulders as the dog's ears swiveled towards an unseen, unheard disturbance. They missed the almost imperceptible shift in the dog's posture, a silent question asked and answered between two beings sharing a single, focused awareness. The word domesticated, you see, was their blind spot. To them, domestication was a process of breaking, of weakening, of sanding down the dangerous edges until only a compliant shell remained. They understood the taming of herd animals for food, the breaking of beasts of burden. But the wolf was a predator, an apex intelligence in its own right. To domesticate a wolf in their minds was to destroy what made it a wolf, to turn it into a caricature. They couldn't conceive of a partnership where the wolf's lethality wasn't extinguished, but merely re-aimed. They never grasped that humans hadn't so much domesticated the wolf as they had entered into a pact with its spirit, a pact written in shared hunts, whispered growls, and the blood of common enemies across millennia. They didn't understand that the leash was not a symbol of subjugation, but a conduit of intent. That fundamental misunderstanding was a ticking bomb, and Cygnus X7 was where it finally detonated. Cygnus X7 was a frontier research outpost, perched on the edge of unexplored space. A small human team, scientists, engineers, and a handful of security personnel. Galactic conquered observers, a Cathar and a Xylosian, were present officially for cooperative research, unofficially to monitor human expansion and perhaps gather data on their quaint customs, including the presence of several security canids. A designation the observers found almost comically euphemistic. Large, sable-coated shepherds, a lean gray creature that looked more wolf than dog, and a compact, brindle mastiff type. Pets, really, with slightly more disciplined training. The attack came without warning. Not a declared enemy of the conquered, but something far older, far more predatory, the krill. Insectoids swarming ravenous. They bypassed the outpost's outer sensor net through some unknown cloaking technology, their initial assault crippling the main comms array and primary defense turrets. Within minutes, the human defenders were isolated, outnumbered, and fighting for their lives in the narrow corridors and labs of the facility. The Cathar observer, Commander Vrex, relayed emergency telemetry via a tight beam burst, his mandibles clicking in grim satisfaction. Human defenses collapsing as predicted, emotional responses compromising tactical decisions. Their so-called security canids are agitated but providing no tactical advantage. The Xylosian entity, Unit 734, concurred in flat, synthesized tones. Data confirms inefficient biological units, resource misallocation evident. On the outpost's internal feeds, which Vrex and Unit 734 were still able to monitor, the scene was chaotic. Plasma fire seared bulkheads. Humans shouted, coordinating, falling back. Then a new sound cut through the din, not gunfire, not screams. A sound that resonated deep in the primal fear centers of any sentient brain. A chorus of low, guttural growls building to a crescendo of full-throated, blood-chilling barks and roars. "What is that?" Vrex demanded, his antennae twitching. "Are they deploying sonic weaponry?" Unit 734's synthesized voice held a new, almost imperceptible flicker of something other than pure logic. "Negative. Audio signature matches the canid units. But the intensity, the coordinated patterns, this is not in their documented behavioral parameters." On the screen, a human security officer, cornered, one arm bleeding, was flanked by the sable shepherd. The krill warrior advanced, its chitinous claws extended. The shepherd didn't just snap or bite. It moved with a blur of focused fury, not at the extended claws, but at the creature's vulnerable leg joints, a takedown maneuver executed with brutal precision. It bought the human precious seconds to use his sidearm. In another corridor, the lean gray wolf dog and the mastiff were not just attacking, they were herding. They flowed around the krill like water, nipping, snarling, driving them into prepared crossfires, anticipating their movements, breaking their formations. They weren't waiting for commands. They were operating with a terrifying, shared intelligence, not just with each other, but with the humans. A gesture, a shouted word, sometimes just a look was enough. The krill, accustomed to predictable bipedal resistance, found themselves facing something alien to their experience. These weren't just animals. They were a whirlwind of teeth and instinct, guided by an intelligence that was both primal and sophisticated. They moved with a speed and ferocity that defied their seemingly docile daytime demeanor. They ignored wounds that would have sent other creatures into shock, driven by something far deeper than mere survival instinct. The Cathar observer, Vrex, was silent now, his mandibles agape. Unit 734 began rapidly cross-referencing millennia of observational data on humanity. The old files, the ones dismissed as myth or sentimental exaggeration, started to flash with new, terrifying significance. Ancient Terran legends of warriors fighting alongside giant wolves. Depictions of gods and heroes attended by fearsome hounds. The persistent, cross-cultural human motif of the loyal, deadly canine guardian. The tide didn't just turn. It was ripped back by a force of nature the galaxy had forgotten existed, or rather had never truly understood. The krill, creatures of relentless aggression, began to falter. Their swarm tactics were disrupted not by superior firepower, but by a form of asymmetrical warfare they couldn't comprehend. They were being outthought, outmaneuvered, and outfought on a primal level they hadn't encountered since their own species clawed its way out of its primordial slime. When reinforcements finally broke through, they found the remaining krill rooted, the outpost secured, albeit heavily damaged. The human survivors were tending their wounded, and among them tending the equally wounded canids. The bond was palpable, not master and pet, but warrior and shield brother. The Cathar and the Xylosian observers walked through the aftermath, their previously smug certainty shattered. They saw krill carapaces punctured not just by plasma, but by deep, tearing bites. They saw strategic choke points littered with enemy dead, where one human and one dog had evidently held the line against impossible odds. That day, the galaxy began to learn, and what they learned was far more complex and far more unsettling than simple affection. The first brutal truth that slammed into the galactic consciousness was about the nature of these wolves as living warning systems and unflinching guardians. The krill had bypassed advanced sensor technology, but they hadn't bypassed the dogs. Later analysis of the outpost's black box recordings revealed that minutes before the attack, the canids had become agitated, their low growls and restless packing dismissed by the humans as general unease. The dogs had known. Their senses, honed over millennia of co-evolution with humanity, perceived threats on a spectrum no machine could match. They didn't just detect anomalies in energy signatures or atmospheric pressure. They smelled intent. They heard the subtle scuttling of a cloaked enemy. They sensed the shift in the quantum foam that heralded a hostile presence. This wasn't just about acute hearing or a superior sense of smell. It was about an instinctual understanding of predation, of danger, of wrongness, that was woven into their very DNA. Humans hadn't bred this out of them. They had refined it, trusted it, integrated it into their own threat assessment protocols. A dog's unexplained growl in an empty corridor was treated with more seriousness by a seasoned human soldier than a flickering sensor blip, because the sensor could be mistaken. The dog rarely. And as guardians, The galaxy had seen bodyguard robots, programmed protectors. They were strong, efficient, and utterly predictable. The Canids on Cygnus X7 were something else. They fought not from programming, but from a fiercely protective instinct that bordered on the fanatical. They placed themselves between their humans and danger without a flicker of hesitation. They were not just defending a designated asset, they were defending their pack, their family. This wasn't a calculation of acceptable losses. It was an absolute, non-negotiable imperative. The brutal truth for the galaxy was this: humans hadn't domesticated the wolf out of their companions. They had harnessed the wolf, its keen senses, its protective fury, its unwavering loyalty. They had kept its edge razor-sharp, and then through a bond of mutual trust and respect, they had aimed it. The dog wasn't a degraded wolf. It was a wolf that had chosen a side, a wolf whose formidable capabilities were now an extension of human will, yet driven by its own indomitable spirit. It was a guardian that couldn't be bribed, couldn't be hacked, and would fight to the last breath. And every human, from a child in a creche to a general on a warship, potentially had such a guardian at their side. A silent, watchful presence whose benign appearance was a carefully maintained deception. The second brutal truth that dawned was the sheer power of the unbreakable pack bond, a force multiplier. Alien species understood hierarchies, allegiances, even symbiotic relationships. But the human-canine bond was something different, something that defied their neat categorizations. It wasn't a simple master-servant dynamic. It was deeper, more primal, rooted in a shared history of survival against the odds. On Cygnus X7, the observers saw humans and dogs moving with a level of coordination that seemed telepathic. A subtle hand signal, a low whistle, sometimes just eye contact across a chaotic battlefield was enough to communicate complex intent. This wasn't mere training. It was a profound, intuitive understanding forged in countless hours of shared experience, shared danger, shared life. The dogs weren't just following orders. They were anticipating needs, taking initiative, protecting their humans' flanks, creating openings, drawing fire. This bond transformed a single human and their canid companion into something far greater than the sum of their parts. It was a force multiplier that conventional military doctrine couldn't account for. How do you quantify the battlefield effectiveness of a creature that will willingly absorb a killing blow meant for its human partner? How do you predict the actions of a human who will charge into hopeless odds to rescue their injured dog? To the logical, cost-benefit analyzing minds of many galactic species, this was madness. It was inefficient. It was terrifyingly effective. The love humans spoke of, the loyalty they prized, these weren't just quaint sentiments. They were the fuel for an unyielding ferocity. A Krill warrior facing a human soldier was one thing. Facing a human soldier whose canid partner had just been injured was to face a berserker, an avatar of focused rage that would not stop, would not yield, until the threat was annihilated or they were slain. And vice versa. The dogs fought with a desperate, intelligent fury to protect their humans, their pack alphas, their family. The brutal truth here was that this bond was a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Enemies who understood it learned to fear it. To see a human accompanied by their wolf was to know that you weren't just facing one opponent, but two, linked by an allegiance that transcended logic and fear. It meant that retreat was not an option for them. It meant that surrender would likely be met with a snarl and a continued, coordinated assault. Humans didn't just command these creatures. They inspired a devotion that translated into a terrifying combat effectiveness. The pack, human and canid, was a single fighting entity, more resilient, more adaptable, and infinitely more dangerous than any lone warrior or programmed drone. The galaxy had prided itself on its advanced weaponry and sophisticated tactics. It had overlooked one of the oldest and most potent weapons of all, the unbreakable will of a pack united in love and war. Then came the third, perhaps most profound and disturbing realization for the galactic observers, the concept of the wolf companion as the mirror to the primal self, taming, not breaking. For millennia, advanced galactic civilizations had prided themselves on transcending their primal origins. They had suppressed their base instincts, their territoriality, their aggression in favor of logic, reason, and controlled, sterile environments. They saw humanity's continued connection to these primitive drives, often exemplified by their relationship with dogs, as a sign of their incomplete evolution. Cygnus X7 disabused them of this notion with brutal efficiency. They saw that humans hadn't sought to eradicate the wolf within their companions, nor within themselves. Instead, they had engaged in a delicate, millennia-long dance of understanding, respect, and integration. The dog, this domesticated wolf, was not a symbol of a conquered wild, but a living bridge to the wild, a constant, tangible connection to the primal forces that still simmered beneath humanity's civilized veneer. Think about it. What does it take to truly earn the respect and loyalty of a creature that is, at its core, a predator, a being of instinct and power? It requires more than just food and shelter. It demands an understanding of pack dynamics, of dominance and submission, of territorial imperatives, of the silent language of threat and reassurance. In domesticating the wolf, humans were forced to confront, understand, and ultimately master these same instincts within themselves. The dog became a mentor in primal effectiveness. Through interaction with their canid companions, humans learned to sharpen their own senses, to trust their gut feelings, to read subtle cues in body language and intent that purely logical beings would miss. They learned the importance of unwavering resolve, of defending one's territory, whether that territory was a patch of land or a core principle. They learned that aggression, when controlled and rightly applied, was not a failing but a vital tool for survival and assertion. The brutal truth was this: the domesticated wolf at a human's side was a constant reminder, an active catalyst for humans to never fully lose their own edge, their own inner wolf. It kept them grounded in the realities of a universe that, for all its technological marvels, remained a dangerous and competitive place. While other species sought to insulate themselves from the primal, humans had chosen to walk with it, to learn from it, to make it an ally. The dog wasn't just a pet. It was a touchstone to a deeper, more resilient part of the human psyche. It was a living embodiment of the idea that true strength comes not from suppressing one's fundamental nature, but from understanding it, disciplining it, and wielding it with purpose. The galaxy had mistaken this for a regression. It was, in fact, a profound and terrifyingly adaptive form of self-mastery. The well-behaved dog at a human's heel in a starport was not a sign of a broken spirit, but of a perfectly controlled power, a power that mirrored the human's own capacity for civilized interaction backed by an unyielding core of primal strength. And there was another layer, a subtle but critical one, that the more perceptive observers began to piece together: the relationship as the ultimate test of character and the forging of leaders. Not every human could elicit that profound, almost fanatical loyalty seen on Cygnus X7. While most dogs were affectionate, the depth of bond that transformed them into veritable combat partners, into extensions of their human's will, that was something earned. These wolves, even in their domesticated state, retained an uncanny ability to judge character. They responded to strength, yes, but also to fairness, to consistency, to courage, to a calm and assertive presence. They gravitated towards natural leaders, towards those who embodied the qualities of a worthy alpha, not a tyrant, but a protector, a provider, a being of reliable resolve. to command the unwavering loyalty of a creature that could, if it chose, be a formidable threat in its own right, spoke volumes about the human in question. It implied a certain inner fortitude, an integrity that the animal instinctively recognized and respected. A human who could walk with such a companion, not through fear or coercion but through mutual allegiance, was likely a human who possessed a high degree of self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and a core of unshakable principle. The brutal truth for the galaxy was that the dog at a human's side could be a subtle but reliable indicator of the human's own caliber. If a creature of such primal honesty and fierce loyalty chose to dedicate its life to a particular human, then that human was not to be underestimated. They weren't just individuals with pets. They were individuals who had passed a profound, unspoken test. They had demonstrated the capacity to lead, to inspire devotion, to forge bonds that transcended mere convenience. This wasn't about tricks or treats. This was about a human being able to project an aura of confident authority, compassionate strength, and unyielding protectiveness that the canid mirrored and amplified. In a galaxy full of posturing politicians and corporate raiders who ruled by fear or economic leverage, the simple, honest allegiance between a human and their dog was a testament to a different kind of power, the power of earned respect, of true leadership. And those who could inspire such devotion in a creature so attuned to primal truths were, by definition, individuals of significant and often underestimated personal power. They were the ones who, when the chips were down, would not only fight for themselves, but would have a fierce, intelligent ally fighting by their side, not because it was ordered to, but because it chose to. The aftermath of Cygnus X7 sent ripples throughout the Galactic Concord and beyond. The initial reports from Commander Vrex and Unit 734 were met with disbelief, then with a stunned, cautious reevaluation. The full sensor logs, the casualty reports krill casualties far exceeding what should have been possible against such a small, ostensibly outmatched human force, were undeniable. Xenoanthropologists and military strategists across the galaxy began to pore over human history with a new, horrified fascination. The ancient myths of Odin with his wolves, Jerry and Freki, of Artemis with her hunting hounds, the ubiquitous presence of dogs in human folklore as loyal guardians, fierce protectors, and wise companions. These were no longer seen as charming fables. They were recognized as cultural echoes of a deep, fundamental truth about the human species. The term pet began to quietly disappear from official galactic discourse when referring to human canids. New designations emerged: canid allies, wolfkin, bonded guardians. There was a newfound wariness, a grudging respect. Human delegations to galactic councils suddenly found their quiet canine companions drawing intense, nervous scrutiny rather than amused condescension. The way a human officer rested a hand on their dog's head was no longer seen as a gesture of idle affection, but as a silent communion with a lethal extension of their own will. Humans, for their part, didn't boast. They didn't need to. They continued their expansion, their research, their often chaotic internal politics, and by their sides always were the dogs, watching, waiting. A quiet, constant reminder of the day the galaxy learned a brutal lesson. The lesson that humanity's greatest perceived weakness, their sentimentality, their attachment to these primitive creatures, was in fact a manifestation of one of their most profound and terrifying strengths. They had not just tamed the wolf, they had forged an alliance with its very soul, and in doing so had ensured that humanity would never, ever, truly walk alone into the darkness between the stars. The faint, almost inaudible growl of a dog in a quiet starship corridor now carried more weight in diplomatic negotiations than a fleet of cruisers. The galaxy learned that day on Cygnus X7 that human, Domestication of the wolf wasn't about creating a subservient plaything. It was about recognizing a kindred spirit, a fellow traveler in the harsh wilderness of existence, and forging an unbreakable alliance with that primal force. It was a testament to humanity's unique brand of foresight, their deep, instinctual understanding of loyalty that transcends species, and their audacious willingness to embrace, rather than eradicate, the wild, the fierce, the unyielding aspects of nature, and by extension of themselves. They learned that the creature lying at a human's feet was not a symbol of weakness, but a carefully sheathed weapon, a living shield, a piece of the human soul given 4 legs and a heart full of fire. They learned that to threaten a human was often to invoke the wrath of something ancient, something that remembered the cold of the Ice Age, the thrill of the hunt, and the sacred bond of the pack. And this is the challenge that echoes from that revelation across the void to you now. The galaxy learned its lesson about underestimation. Have you learned yours? Look within. What is the wolf you have tried to silence, to domesticate into oblivion within yourself? What primal strength, what fierce loyalty, what unyielding courage have you dismissed as inconvenient, as too intense, as not civilized? The humans of this story didn't conquer the wolf. They formed a covenant. They understood that true power lies not in suppression, but in integration, in disciplined partnership with the very forces that make us formidable. Your own inner wolf, your capacity for unwavering focus, your protective instincts, your ability to sense deceit, your courage to stand your ground, these are not weaknesses to be expunged. They are strengths to be honed, to be allied with, to be guided by your highest purpose. The day the galaxy learned why humans domesticated wolves is the day you must recognize the untamed potential residing within you. Forge that unbreakable bond with your own core strengths. Cultivate that fierce loyalty to your principles, to your chosen few. Understand that your deepest instincts, when disciplined and directed, are not a liability but your most potent asset. Stop trying to be merely tame. Strive to be powerfully, purposefully, and loyally allied with the best and strongest parts of your own nature. The universe respects strength, not apology, and true strength is never truly alone. It is always, in some profound way, part of a pack. Find yours, become it, and let the world underestimate you at its peril.